Hi kids, welcome back. I had a lot of fun revisiting my favorite werewolf movies last week, despite the troubled sleep. This week's recommendations don't follow as clear a theme. I initially listed straight up ghost stories, and then towards the end, it was very much, yeah, let's change it up right about here. As before, I hope you'll consider this portion your clear content warning for disturbing themes and horror tropes, as well as some mild, non essential spoilers for the films I'm going to list. No rambling attempts to persuade you to watch horror movies in the first place this time. Let's just get straight to it. Last Night in Soho is a stylish psychological horror film with supernatural elements and mild gore, so as a whole, it has something to offer fans of different types of horror. More importantly, it has a cohesive story, fantastic acting for the most part, and snazzy editing that will make you think that the 60s were really that swinging. Finally, it features the final performance of Diana Rigg, known to millennials and younger as Lady Olenna Tyrell, immortalized forever in endless thug lifestyle memes. But to older fans and tireless media consumers like me, she will always be Emma Peel in The Avengers. The premise of Last Night in Soho is straightforward. Our protagonist is Eloise, played by Thomasin McKenzie, who goes from mostly whispering to screaming hysterically for about 70% of the film. She's an aspiring fashion designer who's accepted to a reputable institute in London. Her grandmother Peggy is concerned that the move might be too much for Eloise. Eloise's late mother suffered from mental health issues, which, if you're a horror fan, is known code for something else. And Eloise appears to be similarly afflicted, if to a lesser degree. But Eloise plucks up her courage and makes the move, whereafter she winds up in the attic of an old building in Soho. On her very first night there, she dreams about a young woman named Sandy, played with predictably delicious pizzazz by Anya Taylor-Joy. And Sandy is an aspiring singer entering a club in the late 1960s, trying to get her big break. It's initially wonderful, going to bed each night and living through Sandy's exciting life as it unfolds in Soho, until it isn't, and Eloise must watch in horror as Sandy's hopes and dreams are torn from her, bit by bloody bit. Worse, Eloise walks through Soho in real life and sees traces of what she thought she had only dreamed. She believes Sandy is real, and as she becomes determined to find out what happened to her, Eloise's dreams bleed more and more profusely into her reality. Now, the thing that might spoil your enjoyment of this film is that Eloise's behavior may begin to grate, particularly towards the last act. Take it from me, it's worth it. Bite down on your irritation, ignore the TSTL vibes she gives, and remember, just because the ghosts are real does not mean that the person seeing them isn't crazy. Eloise is not a mentally healthy person, and she has to navigate a situation that most mentally healthy people wouldn't ever dream of encountering, so bear that in mind when she begins losing her shit. Yes, grown up Harry Potter can bring it. When I heard that Hammer Horror was resurrecting itself with a classic ghost story carried by Daniel Radcliffe, I was firmly in the yeah, good fucking luck camp. As much as I've loved Dan's post Harry Potter work, do remember that this film came out in 2012, less than a year after Deathly Hallows Part 2, We were all still digesting what 30-something Harry Potter looked like in that final scene on platform 9 3/4, and suddenly here Dan is again, this time as a single dad lawyer sent up to sort out a spooky estate that becomes separated from the mainland when the tide rises. Then I saw it and I shut my mouth because, yes, again, grown up Harry Potter can sell it. I don't necessarily buy him as a single dad lawyer, maybe because Dan and I are the same age and I was in law school at the time, and I don't think he quite managed to pull off being paternal or lawyerly at 22. But I do buy the rest of his performance, and make no mistake, this is 80% him doing the lifting. The supporting cast are fantastic, of course, as are the special effects and editing. And with well-chosen locations, the atmosphere of the film alone should hold you long enough to get into the story. But make no mistake, this is grown-up Harry Potter's movie. I'd say the fact that he was lead is partially responsible for the fact that the movie made $130 million on a $15 million budget. But after the initial opening of a movie, an A-list lead won't be enough for a sustained draw. Movies don't work that way anymore. Consider this a hint about the video I plan to make on the death of the true movie stars. When I eventually edit this video to add a video link in the upper left corner, please do click away. The Woman in Black was successful because it is a genuinely frightening, compelling film that stands up to multiple viewings. I saw the film several times while it was out, and a few more times on DVD when I made friends and family see it. Little story for you. One viewing was interrupted by a blackout during a hurricane, and we finished the film on my laptop, and my cousin, who is 15 years older than me, spent the night huddled next to me, sleepless until morning. It can't just have been me who was massively entertained. At the time of its release, The Woman in Black was deemed the most successful British horror film in 20 years. Laying out too much of the premise might actually ruin the experience, as I had the best time going in with no knowledge of The Woman in Black. Not the book, not the 1989 adaptation. Nonetheless, for the particular, here's a bird's eye view. After a family tragedy, Arthur Kipps is sternly rebuked for his poor performance at work, and as a final chance to prove himself, is sent up to Crichton Gifford to arrange the estate of one of the firm's deceased clients, the owner of Eel Marsh House. Upon arriving, Arthur is met by fearful, uncooperative villagers. He manages to make his way up to the house, where he slowly begins to understand why almost everyone was desperate to keep him away. So strap in and follow Arthur as he stumbles through the dread hanging over the village of Crichton Gifford and braves its heart in Eel Marsh House. Take a deep breath, friends. Here comes the deep water. Session 9 is one of those horror movies that builds layer upon layer of dread before giving you the bone-chilling payoff. There is not 1 minute in this movie that you won't have a sick pit of anxiety in your stomach as you watch it. At least that was my experience of it. And the final scene, the final line in the movie, will wedge themselves into your mind and rattle around for days. Even now, 8 years after I first saw it, that moment in the film stands out in sharp relief, scaring me and messing with my stomach again, even as other frightening details of the film fade away. Released quietly in 2001, Session 9 stars Peter Mullen, one of my favorite Scottish actors, and a pre-CSI Miami David Caruso. There's another familiar face from CSI in this, but anyway. So Gordon must lead his team of scrappy asbestos abaters into an abandoned asylum, the real-life Danvers State Mental Hospital. and complete the assignment in a much shorter period of time than usual in order to secure the badly needed contract. Among the hospital detritus, which we learn were actually from the real life hospital and weren't props brought in by the crew, the cleaners discover a set of tapes recording the treatment of a patient named Mary, who suffered from dissociative identity disorder, what in common parlance used to be called multiple personality disorder. The tapes are played one by one in the course of the assignment, even as eerie and violent events begin to occur in the hospital. Events come to a head when we reach session 9 and are given the final piece to the puzzle of what happened and what is going on at the hospital. Session 9 is a masterpiece of psychological horror, referencing actual conditions and mostly getting its psychological notes right, even when discussing dissociative identity disorder, which is a polarizing subject in psychology. This is part of the movie's fear factor. What happens in session 9 is not implausible, even for the most skeptical who have an understanding or education in human psychology. Indeed, session 9 was inspired by a true event that the director heard about as a child. At the same time, if you're in the camp of psychologists who don't believe in dissociative identity disorder, the reason the term multiple personality disorder was scrubbed is because even believers think it doesn't accurately reflect the condition. Anyway, if you're in that camp that doesn't believe in DID, then you have to ask, what or who is responsible for the other beings apparently living inside the patient's head? Session 9 will get you thinking, but won't necessarily give you the answers. Make time for early Ty West. So we have a horror movie loving gene in the family, and this film has the distinction of being the only film to ever prompt my mother to get up and try to run out of the room. House of the Devil is one of those movies that you go in with low expectations for. I didn't know Ty West or any of the cast, except for Tom Noonan and Greta Gerwig. While the premise was intriguing, basically a babysitting gig goes terribly wrong, the first 10 minutes of the film had me wondering whether this was going to be a miss. Now might be the time to discuss my 30-minute rule. If it still sucks after half an hour, you are within your rights to stop watching. We have lives to live. If material does nothing for you within the first half hour, it's not entitled to more of your time. Thankfully, not only did the film amp it up, it sustained that bowstring tautness of dread and anticipation until its masterful payoff. In fact, that moment that got my mother to her feet was so loaded with tension that even her funny disruption didn't manage to completely break its hold. Follow Samantha as things become increasingly eerie and unsettling in the house she's meant to sit, and she has to determine at which point in the night that the money just isn't worth it. The film leans heavily into the satanic panic of the 80s, except it doesn't tell you right away whether there's real cause to be concerned. If you're a fan of older horror films, particularly the 70s and 80s, you'll also love how this was shot. Not only are the filming techniques an homage to the era, but the characters behave in the film as they did in the films from those decades, if you know what I mean. If I didn't know that Tom Noonan and Greta Gerwig were active 21st century actors, I'd certainly have thought, I wonder how those actors are doing now. This film was so good that my family and I decided to give Ty West's The Innkeepers a shot. And House of the Devil is so good that we still love Ty West in this family despite how terrible The Innkeepers was. I'm really glad that Ty West had a good year last year, and I look forward to talking about X and Pearl, both recent releases at some point later on, but not on this October list. Guillermo del Toro is one of those directors who just knows how to tell a big story in what should be a simple plot. If you've seen Pan's Labyrinth, you know exactly what I'm talking about. He shows you the big picture. So in that film, the horrors of the early Francoist period. But it's through the lives of ordinary people whom you would recognize in your own life. In doing so, he gives you a film that manages to be three things at once: a fairy tale, a family drama, and a social commentary. The Devil's Backbone is an early example of Del Toro's capacity for this kind of beautiful, moving filmmaking. To date, this is one of the few horror movies that my dad really loves, and he is not a horror movie fan. Honestly, I can see why this film is a standout. In this story, the horror is often not the point. The film opens against the backdrop of the Spanish Civil War, which happened because military conservatives, the side of Francisco Franco, whose regime is featured in Pan's Labyrinth. Anyway, those guys tried to overthrow the democratically elected government because it was left-leaning. You don't really need to be familiar with the politics to fully appreciate the film, but it does give a little more depth to certain characters. So, Carlos has been recently orphaned, and he's brought out to an orphanage by friends of his late father. The orphanage is in the middle of nowhere in order to keep the children away from the fighting, and yet a bomb has still managed to land in the courtyard. It's not an easy transition for Carlos, not least because he begins receiving ghostly visitations that hint at a secret that he must discover before it's too late. This film has frightening moments, yes, but I think I love it more for its rendition of all aspects of humanity: our beauty, our capacity for love and sacrifice, and how often we are the authors of our own tragedy. I don't think I've ever seen a more beautiful film out of Guillermo del Toro, Pan's Labyrinth not accepted, and if you watch one horror movie on this list, I think this should probably be it. Whenever I need to defend the fact that I saw the first two episodes of Amazon's The Rings of Power, I refer to this movie. I know what you're thinking. What the hell does this movie have to do with The Rings of Power? Well, take a gander at yon movie poster, and you'll see that The Orphanage was J.A. Bayona's debut feature film. J.A. Bayona is not a showrunner for The Rings of Power. He's only the director of the first two episodes, and while those first two episodes were also not great, maybe that whole show would be less crap if Bayona was involved as a showrunner. But let's not get sidetracked into bashing The Rings of Power, as fun and well-deserved as that bashing is. We're here to talk about The Orphanage. The Orphanage, as the title makes clear, is about an orphanage that has been bought by Laura and her family. Laura lived there prior to her adoption and has fond memories of the place, and now she plans to turn the facility into a place for disabled children. Her plans are disrupted when her son Simon befriends a child named Tomas, and Laura is forced to re-examine her past in order to save her family. Like his good friend Guillermo del Toro, who produced the film as a favor, Bayona has a talent for making the audience focus on something deeper than surface-level horror. The supernatural events depicted on screen are chilling and will stay with you for a while, but by the end of the film, you will find that your main takeaway will be more profound. Like the Devil's Backbone, The Orphanage reminds us that spirits were all people once, and that our relationship with them need not be one dominated by terror. Our first vampire movie on the list is a modern classic. I didn't know what to expect when this film first popped onto my radar. I hadn't seen a good vampire movie in a while, and I wasn't very familiar with Persian cinema, but I found the lead just had one of those compelling faces. You may recognize her from the 2012 film Argo. And I decided I was going to try something new that Saturday night, and thank God. Shot in black and white, the general vibe this film gives me is one of an old western, and yet the setting could not be more different. Shot in clear reference to Iran, the film follows a female vampire as she stalks the streets of Bad City. Any further information might spoil the experience of seeing this film for the first time, but trust that it will make you think more deeply about the experience of being female. I made my younger brother watch this after I saw it, and without discussion, he picked up on the exact same things. So, specifically, in certain places, it's just different for women to be out on the street after dark. And sometimes the reason a person can feel safe and free is because they know that they pose a greater threat to anyone or anything nearby. For some of us, being a monster is an acceptable trade-off for not being a victim. The girl isn't any kind of role model, but she is presented as a sharp contrast to what women usually become in a world where they are given few choices. It's an acknowledgement that sometimes feminism can mean women being terrible, but the alternative is simply unthinkable. Not that this film is all about women, mind you. If you're a sitcom fan, you'll see at least one familiar face. Marshall Manesh, whom I'd only ever seen in comedic roles from shows like Will and Grace and How I Met Your Mother. He plays a heroin addict whose son desperately tries to free him of his addiction and get them both out of the terrible Bad City. It's a sad and moving subplot on its own, and the girl's eventual part in it is tragic, but it does serve to underscore the story's central point. In Bad City, there are no clear good guys and bad guys, and your best option is to get out. You should see by now that I like ending with a fun one, so the last item on this part of the list is 2019's Extraordinary. I caught Extraordinary towards the end of 2020 when I was desperate to find something that could make me laugh after all the world had been through that year. The Irish sense of humor has always been fantastic to me. Derry Girls pretty much helped spring me out of depression in 2019. And when that sense of humor is put in a horror scenario, it's like salt. It just brings out all the best flavors. So Rose Dooley is a driving instructor trying to escape her past as a renowned psychic and paranormal investigator. Unfortunately, people and spirits just won't leave her alone. Throw a local Satan worshiper in the mix, and Rose has no choice but to access her powers and confront her history in order to keep people safe. Stocked full of comedians from both sides of the pond, I think my favorite cameo being Siobhan McSweeney, so Derry Girl's sister Michael. Add that to a fast-paced plot and an undercurrent of warmth, and if you've spent the last few days crying or hiding under a blanket because of the earlier items on this list, this is just what you need to get up and about. I'm really enjoying listing these horror films so far, and I hope you're also having fun. I think if I had to pick my favorite week, it would be this one. All the films this week are films I've seen multiple times with different people, and they never disappoint. I'm still finalizing next week's entries, so that assessment might change. But anyway, I hope I catch you guys then. Bye, kids.